Zero apologies.
Droppin Truths.
This is Kyle Cronk.
And I'm Dr. Sarah Lloyd.
We are here to bring you compelling topics on social justice and anti-racism work in our local community with YMCA leaders.
We're so excited you're joining us. We hope you learn together and you get to grapple with the truths we drop.
So it's time to do the work. Buckle up. Zero apologies.
Droppin Truths.
Hey, welcome back.
What up?
How are you?
I am living my best life.
That's awesome.
How are you, white man?
I am very good.
If I had $1 for every time I said, how are you, white man?
I'm very good. You know what I just noticed is that we're at Cabin Light Studios and Miguel is in the house. And I just noticed, I thought that he had a smiley face button on his shirt.
Nope.
But it
Patch.
isn't. It is a patch. Mm-hmm. And that makes me feel good.
There you go.
Yeah, with the little smiley face.
Mm-hmm.
And I like your shirt.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I do want to get paid how you get paid, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to put that out there. And
I
the
know.
universe manifest it, or however. Isn't that how it works for white people? You just manifest it? You like say you want it and then it happens?
Yeah, and then it happens.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Right. That whole privilege thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we might talk about white privilege today and how to use
Maybe.
that. And
It might come up.
Do you notice
Can
every
you
time I
stop
do that,
moving?
it
Yes.
does the snare drum. I feel like I can play the snare drum with my foot.
What's happening for you right now?
I like this background, and it feels like there's a blue light. I mean, I just feel real good.
Okay,
I
great.
feel good to be back. Zero apologies. It's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
I think our last episode was in December. A lot has happened, maybe even November. A lot has happened. There's been an election.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a jankety transfer of power.
Absolutely. Jankety is the perfect word for that.
Yeah. There has been, more conversations about racial equity within all kinds of different spaces, but let's just use one of them as the YMCA, our local YMCA here, South Sound Y. So lots of different ways that we can kind of go down different paths and talk about different topics. But
There was the trial.
There was,
Probably like 75,000 black people that probably died since we last met,
yeah.
based on the math.
And we need to talk about that, and then turn it into, we're trying to figure out how to turn this into learning for people that are viewers, and because I think people are tuning in to figure out how they can be helpful in the racial equity, liberation, all of that sort of thing. So.
Well, that's an interesting point, because I think that is part of it. And if our point is learning and helping people know how to do the work, then we're white centering, right? Which is something I've always wondered about this podcast. Is like, is our purpose to serve white folks or nah? Right? Because if the point is to learn how to show up in this space, then inherently we're reaching white people. If we're talking about like helping people figure out how to do the work, that's a little bit more blended. But like, I think also part of it is to model the possibility of partnering with whiteness to disrupt white supremacy. And in that space, that's why I think it's important to be like, black people welcome home, because one of the most terrifying things on earth, besides just like existing while black in America, is like the idea of partnering with white people, because we know it will end badly for us, right? So I think it's twofold, and I think that's important to name, because even for myself, sometimes I'm like, am I just doing this for white folks? Like, am I being pimped out for white folks right now? Or is it about being like, actually, like, we can do all the things that we dream about in terms of holding white people accountable, and it cannot end poorly for us?
Thank you for sharing that. So sitting with that and thinking about what that means. I mean, I've always thought that the two of us partnering, specifically the two of us partnering as it related to, organizational transformation and stuff like that, that it's necessary. Like it can't happen one without the other, it felt like to me. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, because I think most efforts to do anti-racist work, to do, diversity, inclusion, equity, whatever you call it, DEI, EDI, whatever, those things twofold. One, they inherently center whiteness still, because we're talking about like filling the gap of white understanding. And then number two, there are like concentrated efforts that are exclusionary in some way. So there's a whole camp of people who believe like white people shouldn't be in this work because they don't understand the struggle. There's a whole camp of people that are like, you know, like black and brown people, fix it for yourself. We didn't do it. It was our ancestors. Like, so there's all these different mixes, and those are all fruits of white supremacy perpetuating itself, in that like the real actual work of dismantling the system will require all of us, and specifically black women and white men partnering together, because it represents the most marginalized and the most lifted up by the system.
Right. So I'm glad to be partnering.
You're welcome. Speaking of black women and white men partnering, let's talk about our new president.
Right.
And more specifically,
The vice president?
the new VP.
Yeah, right. Kamala Harris.
So dope.
Yeah, I mean, what are we going to talk about? Representation, what it felt like for black and brown girls all over the United States to wake up one day to see the first black Jamaican vice president, second highest office in the land. I mean, huge in terms of representation, and that like we can do better, we can do more, we can be anything that we want to be.
Sure. I mean, whatever you want to talk about.
I'm not sure where you wanted to go with that.
I could go a million different directions. I think it is the election in total is a huge reflection of how black women continue to show up for our greater society in a real, like, solid we before me kind of way, which has been studied academically, in that, like, black women are the one group that consistently over time is more focused on the greater good than themselves.
Sure.
So I think that's a huge part of it, and I want us to be vigilant and careful about not saying that it is such a sign of progress, which we typically do inside of social movements, that we relax around the importance and critical nature of how much work we need to do and how little of a victory that actually is on the scale of what needs to be done.
So I hope that you didn't take that to mean, from my perspective, that we've achieved some greatness. I was just...
No, I think collectively people are like, right? Like,
I mean, it's a good thing, but then look
it.
what happened that same day, like on the insurrection or whatever you call it, when people stormed the Capitol. It's like we are not that far. There is so much work to do. It's not. I mean, that is a good thing, but yeah, we're far away from where we need to be.
Right, because there's a vast difference between black victory and white accountability.
For sure.
And so I think there's like all throughout our society right now and since the beginning of time has been this level of like where white people walk through harm or situations or places where they can be held accountable. There is a list of reasons why the wrongdoing makes sense. And in the same breath, blackness is held accountable for infinite amounts of things that have nothing to do with us. You know, we're a credit to our race or a detriment, all those different things. And so I think, you know, the insurrection is a good example of that, where white folks who did this were then surprised that there was accountability at the other side. Like almost on a broad scale of like, what?
Why are we in trouble?
Why am I in trouble?
Right.
Like, I was just doing
this is
the thing.
like didn't somebody like equate that to, somebody said something about equating that to like, hey, somebody was just on spring break, they got caught up in the moment.
Totally. Like, I drank one too many beers.
Yeah.
But it's like, and so many people have talked about it, but if black people were to do that same thing,
Oh my gosh.
first of all, like, no one would be
I
living
can't even imagine the
in order
carnage.
to go through trial.
I mean, I can't even imagine the carnage.
And so I think
And visually, I mean, it would have been...
it would have been the massacre of 2020.
I don't even know what you would have called it. I mean, massacre is the closest thing that I could think of. I don't know what I was doing but I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking. Is like, if these are black and brown people doing the same thing, that we are witnessing the biggest bloodbath I've ever could ever imagine.
Yeah, so I think it's important to name and recognize that in addition to like the margin that white folks have to do ignorant ass shit that black people just don't have, there actually is an expectation of the inciting of violence that is both allowed and expected of whiteness, that whenever you go through, like, both in microcosms of the society and the broader society, like, violence is expected and allowed from whiteness. And so violence sometimes looks like, you know, like we can downplay microaggressions, but microaggressions are very intentionally named microaggressions because on a small person-to-person scale, there's aggression there, and that is violence. And so when you think about, like, if I go into a meeting and I say, hey, I have some thoughts, and people are like, yeah, hang on, Kyle has to talk first, that's fucking violence. And what does it look like if we can have communities that prefer, center, and promote violence against black people, understanding that, like, we're not talking just about police who are shooting us down. We're not talking about the guy at the gas station who just goes fucking bananas on the 3 young black men. Yes, that's violence, and so is you cutting me off because you don't think my thoughts are more important than your thoughts. Like, that's fucking violence. And until we get to a point where we're like, violence is fucking violence, and we want to prevent violence and disrupt violence, that means literally putting white people in their place time and time and time and time again. And we center white comfort way too much for that.
Sure.
The worst thing that any one of us can do, and I'm programmed to do it too, the worst thing I can do is make a white person uncomfortable. And so for me to sit in space where I'm like, I know you're uncomfortable and I don't care, is literally me fighting my fucking biology.
Right.
And until we're all willing to do that, we will not get where we're trying to go.
And that's where we have to be. I mean, that's that discomfort or uncomfortableness or whatever you call it, that tension, that conflict. And again, trying not to make it into a violent act, but there is conflict there, is because, you know, back to what we were talking about a couple of shows ago, the system is going to do what the system does to maintain itself. And unless white people and black people and everybody in the system are doing things to challenge it and disrupt it, then it's built to maintain itself. I mean, that's the whole point.
Right, because the system's power is not in the system, it's in the people who participate in the system without asking. And there are
wait, say that again.
The system is not powerful in and of itself. It's powerful because of the people who participate in the system without asking questions. Right.
And that's the key for me, is that last part of not questioning why things are the way that they are. I mean, I think that feels to me like part of the problem when I started learning more and getting deeper into this, into what being an anti-racist organization might look like and what you need to do. And I've done a fair amount of, I don't know, introspection and work, and sometimes I don't even see it. And I'm committed. Like, I'm there. I want to disrupt the system. And sometimes that I don't know if it was you or somebody else had said that, you know, it's not the sharks, it's the water. It's all of it around us, and sometimes you can't see it. So that I like your take on the accountability idea, that white people specifically have to hold themselves to a different level of accountability, and they have to continue to push the system. So if you're coming a different podcast, you had said that, you know, every day that you're coming into situations, you're thinking about, what thing am I going to challenge? Because they're all challenged, right? No one wants you to be there. So you're getting this thing and this thing and this thing, and no, I'm not going to fight that one and not that one, but that one I am. And so as a white person, specifically as a white male with the privilege that I've got, my real accountability and job is to keep that front and center and continue to get the organization or the circumstance to be uncomfortable and to challenge the status quo. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm continuing the system.
Exactly. So I think like two critical pieces of that is one, understanding, like you said, if you're not doing that, then you're doing the opposite, like, and getting rid of the idea that you can be neutral in these matters, because I think a lot of people hold on to the idea that it's like, okay, so I want to say something, but I don't know what to do, so I'm going to sit here in neutral. And it's like there is no neutral. Right. So either you're disrupting it or you're perpetuating it, and that clarity is important. I think the second part is that in order for us to hold ourselves accountable, we have to both have a standard established that spells out something different, and there has to be a level of authority that people have to hold us accountable. The problem is, if the people who notice that you're being white supremacist are black, but inherently you don't have to trust or believe black people, you don't have to listen to black people when they talk, and what they say is inherently dismissed, then by definition, we don't have the authority to hold you accountable. So what it looks like is being like, hey, white friend, who hopefully gets it, can you please tell Kyle that Kyle did something, but he's not going to trust me when I say that's fucking harmful. So it has to be this circle, instead of just being like, what if we literally put black people on the same level and plane of authority as every other person. That way, when I say, what you just did hurt me, that you inherently trust it and say, how do I fix it? Instead of like, why? Why did it hurt you? What did I do? I didn't do anything, right? Yeah. And so that... I was
just having a conversation. I was just talking.
Right. I was telling you my thoughts. You asked me my thoughts, right?
I had an opinion.
So it's the same exact understanding. Like, when you understand that all of it is violence, then you can treat it as violence. And so like inside of the domestic violence realm, for instance, there's all kinds of victim blaming that comes that perpetuates violent and abusive dynamics. And if we understand whiteness and blackness have an abusive dynamic, then you shift and change how you approach it in a way that allows people to move forward and say, like, you deserve power of choice in your life, which is exactly the conversation you have with domestic violence survivors. Being like, what would it look like for you to make choices? But black people can't do that because we don't have authority in situations where whiteness is involved.
So good, so powerful. Just trying to think about that whole accountability thing and what you're saying about what is the difference. What is the, we talked, there was a metaphor a couple podcasts ago about the metaphor of the light switch, unrelated to this topic, but it was the concept of a light switch. Is when, like, for me, I don't know, I need to sit and think about it, but coming into situations, because I do believe black people, and I specifically believe, especially as it relates to our organization, both from a staff perspective, from a trustee perspective, from a volunteer perspective, we are trying to send that we're not, we by a long shot are nowhere near where we need to be, but we're trying to do things differently and better, and, acting on things as we learn them and all that sort of stuff. So it's just interesting to me to hear from your perspective, that you would need to share with someone else, and then to get it to me before I would listen. So I think that there's something to learn in that concept, is that knowing that if you're a white person in a, with the privilege that you have, is that you need to think about coming into situations where there's black and brown people, and you need to center that.
And specifically blackness, and people ask this all the time, well, why black women? What about like the indigenous community? What about like, okay, so if it's black women, then it's also like black trans women, and it's also, right? And so it's fascinating to me because it reveals how anti-black our society is, in that the answer to removing something that is plaguing us all can't possibly be the prioritization of black lives. So that's fascinating, first of all. And then second of all, to like walk through like, okay, so do you mean black trans women also? I'm like, yes, because black trans women are women, so yes, and they're black. So like, so you needing to delineate that doesn't have anything to do with my statement. In terms of indigenous individuals, it is not to say that white people have shown up for indigenous folks in a way that's just like staggeringly successful. What it is to say is that there are similar conditions that manifest differently for both populations, and the end result is that there are some, though not sufficient, protections at the federal, systemic, state, and white people level of protecting and responding to the harm that's been done for indigenous communities. So for instance, you take like reservations, right? Is that enough? No, because inherently they could run everywhere, they could live everywhere, and they stewarded everything. And now it's like you get this like tiny little box to live in.
Right.
And a similar guarantee was also given to black people when we were liberated from slavery, and that each one of us would get 40 acres and a mule.
Right.
And there is not one fucking black person in the history of our civilization that has ever had that guarantee paid out.
Right.
So there is a level of saying, like, to center blackness is not to say fuck everybody else.
Right.
It's not whiteness, it's blackness. What it is to say is like, what would it look like if you flip the system on its side, you put blackness at center, and you walk towards it, and as you walk towards it and face something, you fucking resolve it. To the point where you want black people to understand that they're important in the situation.
Right.
If you do that, then you would have inherently resolved other issues. And so that's why centering blackness is so critical. And it's so fascinating when I name that specifically, the resistance that comes in different forms, like curiosity and stuff. But it's like, why is blackness the answer? Because inherently blackness is so offensive that it can't possibly be the key to set us free.
Right. So good. Yeah, I mean, I'm there. I don't even really need to sit with that. I believe that, and I believe you.
And so I think what it looks like then is understanding, like, that's a classic example, right? When I'm like, okay, the key is centering blackness, and then people are like, well, I have some questions. It's like, if you understand that you're wrestling, whatever you present, the fact that you're wrestling with the idea that centering blackness could be the solution is a manifestation of violence in your own life, right? So you understand, like, there is a lack of acceptance that blackness could be the answer. Further, there's this black woman saying to me, black women centering is how we move through. And why though? Like, I have some questions. Is this self-serving? Like, does she just want to be centered in this? All of that is violence against blackness. And so if you understand that scale, then what happens is when you look at your own life, you can no longer give yourself a pass for seemingly small and well-intentioned harm that happens, because you understand that the impact is real.
Right.
So as you look into your own life and your own relationships in your own spaces, I think when you're being really honest, you can understand that you're perpetuating violence regularly. You're modeling it for your children. You're creating spaces and relationships inherently built upon the idea that violence against black people is okay.
Right.
Necessary even.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm there.
So, how do you move through that? I mean, I think, like you've said, you're actively engaged in the work, right? And you still have moments. So what does a moment look like?
Where I'm not successful? Oh, well, I got lots of those, unfortunately.
But I think, seriously, I think, give an example of that.
Well, a great example is a great example is awareness. So let's just say I get up, I'm ready to go to work, I'm going to do my thing, and let's just say that it's Zoom focused today, right? So my life is turned to Zoom. How do I center black and brown staff in my world? Like, if I don't actively wake up, consciously sit down and map that out for myself, or map that out with staff in mind, or people in mind that are not white, then I'm perpetuating that. So I go through a thing, and I try to go through a thing. I sit down and I try to think about what is that going to look like in this particular conversation. We do some anti-racism work, and I shared out this prompt for this. Happened this morning. I shared out this prompt. I did not know that this conversation was going to go in the way that it did. And it went in a really great thing, but it went from centering around a more racism than gender identity, but it went into this gender identity conversation that was awesome, and it had nothing. You know, at one point, you know, the conversation took off, but I was trying to center blackness, and centering, or I was going to say, being pro-black does not mean you're anti-white. So it feels, you know, a little bit like I'm kind of getting off topic here a little bit, but I've got this tangent that I wanted to go down about this, you know, centering blackness in an organization or in a moment or in a meeting does not mean that you're going to lose something as a white person. That's, I think, a challenge for, it's not necessarily a challenge for me at this point. It is, I think it challenges other white people to say, what does that look like and how do they do it?
Sure.
Because I think you're right about, like, what do I do on a day-to-day basis to center blackness in my organization?
Because I think a few things. Number one, I think I appreciate your example, and I think, you know, I think to times where I have set an agenda for a meeting, and then I walk into the meeting and it goes sideways, and I'm like, so we didn't do anything on the agenda. And that can happen, right? Like, very easily.
Right.
And so I think in addition to, like, for instance, like setting the structure of a meeting to be like, okay, we're going to center in this meeting. It's also like, how do you get hyper vigilant about, like, how am I centering blackness now and right now and right now? Because otherwise what you can be like is like, I did my 15-minute meditation in the morning about centering blackness, and it's like, and then you get cut off by someone on the freeway and you're like, now I'm thinking about some other shit, right? So it's like, how do you understand fundamentally that centering blackness is a choice every single minute, every single day? And we can't take for granted the fact that you can't have like one meaningful conversation and then be like, you're right, I should breathe oxygen, and now it's just going to naturally happen for you. Literally, your wiring and my wiring is anti-black, and so if you understand the wiring and programming is anti-black, and so if you understand that, then the vigilance comes up differently. I think in terms of like understanding that if I were to be pro-black, then I have to be anti-white or whatever is rooted in a few things. Number one, scarcity, and the idea that like there isn't enough abundance for everyone. And number two, I think when you respond in kind with that kind of response, then you're inherently admitting the fact that black people are being treated at a detriment, and that's not acceptable, right?
Or is that what you're saying is the uncomfortableness? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because I think you can't. Here's my thing about unconscious bias, okay? I don't think in this day and time you can have unconscious bias because there's too much fucking information about what's actually happening that it's not unconscious anymore. You are making a fucking choice to be like, oh, I don't see it anywhere. Like, you have to choose that, because I get it, unconscious bias, I get the principle, I've read the books, I understand it academically, got it, totally. Also, it suggests the idea that you've had no access to anything that has ever seeped into you, to which you're like, maybe I should think about my fucking life. And if that's actually true, with this day and age and the fucking interwebs and the internet and Google, then that's fucking bizarre and crazy, and you should have an award for being that fucking off the grid. Otherwise, what it actually is let's call it what it is. Like, I think calling it the system, calling it unconscious bias is just a bunch of passes for white folks to be like, how was I supposed to know? And the reality is...
So you're saying that we do know.
Absolutely. Everyone fucking knows that there is a fucking problem. They've heard at least one time. Now, if they don't believe black people, then they don't believe it's a problem. But that's not an issue of unconscious bias. That's an issue of, like, prioritizing truths. So knowing that that's the case, if I believe fundamentally there is scarcity, and I also believe fundamentally that white is superior, then it makes perfect sense that the most assets should go to the people who are best, which in this case is whiteness. But if I'm sitting in a space where I'm like, actually, what if all of us can win? Then I'm not worried about what do I have to sacrifice in order for your family to eat. I'm just like, yeah, your family should eat, my family eats. So it's that. Like, why do we understand fundamentally that not everyone can win? And in that space, why are we okay with black people not winning?
Yeah, and I was gonna throw out your capitalism idea.
Oh, I could talk about capitalism all day.
I mean, that's where you're talking about the scarcity. I mean, that's the system that we're in. There's winners and losers, and you're absolutely right about black people being on the losing end of that.
Right.
100%.
Because that's how it's built, but that's not actually how resources work at all.
No, I totally agree. But the system made the resources go in that way. Some people get them, some people don't.
Well, let's be clear. Like 12 white dudes built the system.
Absolutely.
So they could hold power and
exactly.
never lose it. That's the system. So
Yeah.
it's like the system, again, it's not this ominous being. It's people actively moving in a way without challenging their beliefs.
Yeah.
And so until we challenge beliefs about everything, then we can't actually fundamentally shift and change the possibility of winning. Because what I think at the center of white fear around actually dismantling white supremacy is the principle that they will have to sacrifice something.
Yeah,
right?
no, right.
And that when they sacrifice, the tables will turn, and now we'll live in a black supremacist society.
Yeah.
When the reality is, black people aren't asking for revenge, we're asking for equity.
Yeah. No, I'm totally there.
And that principle, if white people actually embrace that principle, then there would be no option but to move forward in every single moment with black centering vigilance. And that isn't present.
Right.
And so fundamentally, there's a piece in every single white person that's like, what if I lose what I have? And in that space, it's like, what if you lose it? Imagine being without it. And let that proximity to pain drive you towards none of us are going without ever again.
Right. I like that. That was good.
Because, I mean, we've talked about it with you multiple times, right? Like, it's that moment with the shirt where you're at Safeway and you're like, oh my God, what will happen?
Right.
Or if you're pushing the envelope too far at work and you're like, am I going to get fired in this space? That moment for you is like, what if I lose everything? And in that moment, it's like, oh, so the idea of being where black people are currently is so unacceptable to you that fear paralyzes you from moving? That's fucking crazy that it doesn't drive you to fixing it, right? And so what does it look like for us to understand, like, again, it's not about revenge, it's about equity. And equity means, like, I'm not even asking for you to make the past right, which, you know, let's be honest, will never happen. What I'm saying is, moving forward, can we accept the fact that all of us should have our basic, all the way up to level 6 needs met, and that you're committed to making that happen?
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
What? What's happening for you over there?
I'm just sitting. Awkwardly.
Why are you being awkward?
I don't know that it's intentional. I think it just is part of my charm.
Awkward charm. Got it.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Do you feel like there is a black-owned business in your world that we should highlight?
Yes.
Good. Should I?
Should
I'm unclear with what happened to the last episode, so should I do that again?
B Hoop Photography.
Oh! One more time.
B Hoop Photography. Brian Hooper. He is
I like it.
Fucking stellar. He does video, photography, all kinds of amazing things. He's just done some documentaries that you might have seen, etc. But he also will do like your senior photos and shit. So he's dope.
Cool.
He's a really good friend of mine. We went to 8th grade together.
Oh, no way.
Yep. Brian Hooper.
You went to 8th grade together. I wish I could have my senior pictures. You've seen my senior picture.
I have seen them, yes. I have witnessed them in all of their...
Actually, that might have been my junior year in high school. All right. Shout out to Cabin Light.
I love Cabin Light.
Why do you love them? They just did some cool stuff. Oh, we probably don't need to say that again. But they did some cool stuff recently, right? Didn't they video you?
When do they not do cool things?
I know, but...
So, like, recently as opposed to, like, before?
Right.
No.
2021 versus 2020.
Cabin Light is on some next level shit for sure. They're blowing up. All the people are like, let me work with Cabin Light.
Right.
And I'm like, I mean, I
Why
feel like
wouldn't
I
you?
was there in the beginning, but it's cool. But they are Brown owned and Brown operated. So in addition to getting quality work, we're also paying into Brown generational wealth, which I'm a huge fan of. So.
Right. And the set, we've got new lighting, we've got instruments. I was waiting for you to pick up one of the guitars and strum or
Yeah, you're not ready for that.
crash the cymbal.
No one's ready for that.
No, the viewers aren't ready.
So thank you, Cabin Light. I don't
Yeah.
know what is happening with you right now, but it's cool. And
A lot of shade.
friends,
2021.
we'll see you next time, friends.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. Peace.
Bye.
This was Zero Apologies.
Dropping Truths.
White folks, share this with your friends and make sure you're doing the work.
And black folks, welcome home.